Thanks, Rich, for the invitation to speak here, and I want to thank the folks at NBR. Rich already noted it's based in Washington State, and just to remind folks that not all the think tanks that are necessary for the thinking in this country are located in Washington, D.C. Put in a plug there for the West Coast. So I want to thank Rich, all the folks at NBR, for your support over the last couple of years, certainly in helping the members of Congress who are part of the U.S.-China Working Group gather academics so that we can learn a little bit more from folks who spend more time thinking about places like China than the members of Congress do. We've had a very successful almost 3 years. Next month is our third year as U.S.-China Working Group. And Mark Kirk, my Republican colleague, and I will likely be doing some sort of event in June or July to commemorate our 3 years. That I was noting yesterday when I was making some notes about what to say today, that my notes were all about engaging China as opposed to engaging Asia, which of course is the title of the forum today. And I thought, well, maybe I should change. But I thought, well, I don't know. I know more about China than about generally Asia, so I'll just stick with what I know, and then let you ask questions about the things I don't know, and see if I can give you an answer to those things. But I think there might be some lessons to learn from the U.S. perspective, and I think I'm going to talk from it'll be my perspective of the U.S. perspective. There are other perspectives of the U.S. perspective around Washington, D.C., and I think importantly around the country. I'll give you my perspective, and my perspective really comes from being, I think, from the West Coast, and probably more importantly, in my view, being from the Pacific Northwest, which is different than the West Coast. Historically, we've had a long relationship with Asia, because Asia is our backyard in the Pacific Northwest, as we are Asia's backyard. And I'm always struck by the term, which most folks kind of ran out of favor, but still some people use it. I'm always struck by the term Far East, the Far East, because it implies that things are east from here, east from Washington, D.C. You have to travel east to get anywhere in the world. Well, where I come from, that's not true at all. Asia is my near west. It's only a stone's throw across the Pacific Ocean. I don't have to go through New York or D.C. to get there. And as a result, that perspective that we have in the Northwest is that our future is very much tied to what happens in the Asia Pacific. I think the final point I'm going to make at the very end here, and I'll just give you the headline on this, is that I think in the future, the United States, Rich touched on it, but the United States should not see ourselves as an Asian nation, but we ought to see ourselves as much as a nation of Asia as much as the countries that are actually in the Asia Pacific, because we are in the Asia Pacific, where I come from, and I think that is where our focus has to, for our long-term future, should be directed, and in many ways that's why we started the U.S.-China Working Group 3 years ago, in order to get some better perspective in Congress about the various relationships that we have with China. So I want to talk a little bit about that, but I certainly couldn't really start without first, expressing condolences of certainly the people I represent to the people of Burma, the people of China, the natural disasters, tragedies that take place over the last several weeks. And Rich pointed out very ably, of course, the difference in response between the two governments. But I want to point out as well that the response from our own government, we've really, we've made our offer of help. Burma's been a little tougher to get into, but we've already, as far as China goes, we've already had 3 C-17s fly to China with material, food, water, containers, blankets, generators, lanterns. Just recently delivered a 9-person AID team who are experts in search and rescue to help with recovery in China. So trying to do our part. Passed a resolution in the House recently, two resolution on Burma and on China, both expressing the condolences of Congress to the people of those countries. And Mark and I led a letter to the Chinese, basically offering any help that we can offer help with the recovery there. So we need to keep sure we keep folks in mind until they're able to until people are able to recover. I want to talk about three elements, I think, of engagement and focusing on China here. Again, from the thing I know best, which again I will also say, even though I would argue that I know from my own perspective, I know China best than any of the other Asian countries. I assure you, there are people in this room who know China a lot better than I do. So I'm not. My standard is me, not the level of knowledge in this room here. So, but first thing I want to point out is engagement on trade. The example for Washington State and China is a very, I think, telling example. Exports from Washington State, my home state, from 2000 to 2007 to China increased 406% in those 7 years. Exports to the rest of the world from Washington State increased 87% during that same period of time. So 406% to 87%. The top the top export market for Washington State is in fact China, about $9.6 billion in 2007. Numbers 2 through 5 in order are Japan, Canada, India, and South Korea. So again, this sort of underscores why Washington State tends to look to Asia more often than not. Anybody here from Canada? I'm not making the argument that you're an Asian nation. Noting the three of the other four are. Okay. Asia Pacific, certainly Asia Pacific, however. The second district, my own district, which obviously things are going to be a little skewed. My own district, we make all the Boeing commercial airplanes in my district except for the 737. So 747, 787, the 777. If the Air Force made the right decision, we'd still be making it 767, but for those who follow that. But in my own district, same time frame, 2000 to 2007, exports to China increased 329%. The number one, obviously, being transportation equipment, airplanes. Number two was computer and electronics, about $202 million, and then crop production, about $198 million. And that's, again, it's out of my own district. And these numbers are from the U.S.-China Business Council. And they put out a great document, came out about a week and a half ago, I think, a week and a half ago. We had asked the U.S.-China Business Council, Mark Kirk and I had asked them to put together district-by-district numbers of exports to China. And they've done it. And it's on. You can go online, U.S.-China Business Council website. I don't have the address for it. Easy enough to find. And you can download, or rather than download, read it off your screen, district-by-district numbers of exports from those districts to China. So we thought the best way to sort of bring this idea of home of trade and engaging China on trade is to show members of Congress what it means in their own district for trade. And this is all important, this engagement on trade, because what will probably be the last strategic economic dialogue takes place next month. That is the dialogue that the Bush administration started with China, high level, to create a strategic framework for our economic relationship. Takes place last month. The last one takes place next month. Probably not going to have one in December because of all the transition. But the concept of the strategic economic dialogue is very important for the U.S. And there's no guarantee the next administration, whoever it is going to continue that. And if there's one thing I could make a point about on this issue is that I believe, and I know Mark Kirk believes, it's very important to call on the next administration to continue the strategic economic dialogue. They can call it what they want. They can rename it. They can reconfigure it, but it ought to continue. It ought to continue. Our long-term economic relationships in Asia and with China do depend on it. The second issue of engagement has to do with security, and I'm going to touch just on a few things there. And first off, Ambassador Hill will be speaking to you later this morning, and I imagine he'll be talking about the six-party talks. So I'll let him get into the details on that. But this idea of the six-party talks, I think, is important. Develop a package deal to address concerns of U.S. security interests and security interests of others in the region. And other countries have their list of things that are important. U.S. security interest obviously has to do with the non-proliferation issues on the Korean Peninsula. But I think what would be important to ask Chris, I believe he's given some thought to this, is long term. Does this provide a framework long term for us to consider a more formalized approach to security and addressing security needs in the region? Do the six-party talks allow that? What would be the benefit of that? What would not? What would be the downside to that? It's a question that I'm certainly interested in trying to find an answer to, help get an answer to. So there's a second issue on engagement on security. I think is a important one, and this gets into the nuts and bolts of engagement. One thing I like to say in the U.S.-China Working Group is that a lot of members of Congress, when they deal with China, we all want to win the jackpot. We want to win the big dollar prize. When in fact, you're probably going to have better success if you find and pick up nickels and dimes. And then after a while, you find out you have a lot of nickels and dimes. You have a lot of things to show for your work. And frankly, it's probably a lot easier to do that than to win the jackpot. And one of those nickels and dimes, one of those packages of nickels and dimes is the DTL, or Defense Telephone Link, that after several years of negotiation between the Department of Defense and the Ministry of National Defense in China, a DTL was recently established, something that many members of Congress have agitated and advocated for, and as a useful tool to improve crisis communications between the U.S. and China. Several examples over the last couple of years are pretty telling. The P3 incident in April of 2001, even the launch of Taipodong in July, what would have been our July 4th, a few years back from North Korea, having a phone to pick up and call the Chinese and say, we know something's going on, we want to tell you, or can you tell us what's going on? Just a way to improve crisis communications and have those communications occur immediately. Well, the first DTL call, first Defense Telephone Link call, occurred on April 10th, just last month, between Secretary Robert Gates of our Department of Defense and the People's Republic of China Minister of National Defense, General Liang Guanglia. Is that right? Got it. Good. All right. Who I've yet to meet and hope to meet on my next trip to China. But so the first call took place. I want to assure you, it was not a call because there was a crisis. It was a call. It was a test call to pick up. How you doing? Is this thing working? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? And but you have to do that so you know that it works when there's a crisis. But that first call occurred April 10th. Hope that's a tool that we can continue to use. Hopefully use as little as possible, frankly. The idea of having these is that you want to be sure you don't have to use them, but they're there when you need them. Finally, I'll just mention one last issue of engagement, and that's on again, maybe it's nickels and dimes. It's pretty important. It's food and product safety. I don't really need to recount the history of the last year and a half about food safety and product safety issues here in the U.S. and how they're related to production methods and manufacturing methods in China, but they do exist. And over the last 5 to 10 years, there have been more food products and other products that are in our Food and Drug Administration's portfolio that have been imported into the U.S. than have actually been produced in the U.S. So over the last 5 to 10 years, the things that the FDA looks at and is responsible for safety, more of those things are now being imported into the U.S. that are actually being produced in the U.S. This is important because it underscores the growing need to deploy FDA personnel to other countries to ensure the safety of those products, whether it's food or other products, ensure the safety of those products before they get onto the shelf and before they get into my refrigerator or into my kid's toy box. And China is certainly on top of that list of countries that import into the U.S. a lot of these products. And as a result, China is on top of the list for permanent deployment of FDA personnel. So in this budget, in the proposed budget, the FY09 budget, the FDA has proposed, and I don't foresee any problems on our side, the FDA has proposed having 13 FDA personnel deployed to China, 8 FDA personnel, and then 5 foreign service nationals in China, in Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. The work program would be based on the memorandum of agreements with AQ, SIQ, as well as SFDA, the State Food and Drug Administration. These MOAs were signed last fall. The role would be for our folks to communicate standards and expectations to help Chinese develop and implement standards that be sure that they meet U.S. standards, as well as then to audit and inspect. As I said, the money is in the FY09 budget, and it is ready to go. There is one more step, and that step is an important one, but we still lack a final okay from a very important aid ministry in China, and we're looking forward to that okay coming, but that okay has not yet been made. So we are urging that ministry to sign off on this so we can move forward once we approve the money. We think it's in our best interest from a safety perspective. I think it's in the Chinese best interest from their employment-based perspective. I think it's a win-win situation if we can get this done, and we ought to get it done. Now, the next step is for the Consumer Product Safety Commission to develop a presence in China. And on May 12th, we received a letter from CPSC to my office saying that the agency, Consumer Product Safety Commission, indicated a willingness to develop a small presence, then evaluate that presence after a year or so of operation to determine its future approach. Obviously, the dollar amount to that, so on, but at least we've got an indication of a willingness to do that. I'll just wrap up with a few comments. I want to make a pitch for a bill, HR 3273. It's all about engagement. The U.S.-China Market Engagement and Export Promotion Act to increase the amount of small and medium-sized business export to China from the United States. 3273 is an important bill. It gives members of Congress a chance to do something positive with regards to China, as opposed to sometimes incessantly negative discussion you get out of some members of Congress. But I'll conclude with a couple of final points. One is engagement is real. Engagement is real. Trade on security, on food and product safety, it's very real. There are further opportunities for very real engagement as well. Counter-narcotics, counterterrorism, non-proliferation. The second point I want to make about engagement is engagement gets results. The defense telephone link, the movement that we have on food and product safety, the movement that we've seen as far as China goes on its currency, engagement does get results. That is a message that I think is very important for members of Congress to hear, and if they were here, I would tell them that. So if you had a chance to talk to my colleagues, please repeat my message to them. Engagement is real. Not engaging, and it gets results. Not engaging is unrealistic, and it doesn't get you anything. So there are a lot of mechanisms out there that the U.S. can use. APEC is a critical mechanism for the United States in the Asia-Pacific region. achieving status at the East Asia Security Summit. I think we should continue in the U.S. to agitate for that. Being supportive of ASEAN nations is important. Developing and strengthening our strategic alliances in that region continue to be an important tool for us to use. And I'll just come back to what I said about U.S. engaging Asia generally. When I said at the beginning, is that clearly my list, I would argue that my list shows that we have some very direct interests in Asia. The United States has some very direct and important interests in Asia. And although there are countries acting without direct U.S. involvement in negotiating a variety of things and relationships between countries in Asia, I think long in the future, because of as an example, the things that I've listed, the U.S. must begin to see itself, perhaps not as an Asian nation, but certainly as a nation, a nation of Asia, because of all of the relationships and interests that we have in that region. And I think if we change our mindset a little bit, see Asia as our backyard, not just from the West Coast, but from sea to shining sea, that we will be better off. It will strengthen our security interests in the long term, strengthen our economic relationships in the long term, and result in the U.S. Being a much more prosperous nation and provide us an opportunity to help lead by example and lead with our partners in Asia Pacific. So with that, appreciate the chance to say hello, and I believe I've got some time for questions. Yeah, about 15 minutes.
The only time you talked about imports was in the context of food and product safety. But when Mickey Cantor, who was then U.S. Trade Representative in the early 90s, spoke in Seattle, and emphasized exports, someone in the audience said, "Excuse me, Mr. Cantor, we are the port of Seattle. Not only are there jobs in trucking and port services, but also retail, distribution, insurance, law, and so forth." I wonder if in your work in the Congress, you also talk about imports, their value not only to jobs, but to holding down inflation, and to the pattern of U.S. subsidiaries and their parent companies, which in fact characterizes a lot of our imports. It does sound a little bit mercantilist if you don't mention two-way trade.
Well, I know you're not telling me I'm mercantilist, and if you are, we can step outside. But certainly, imports are important to Washington State. In fact, for a while, all we were exporting was air. Not that you stay at the Port of Seattle and Tacoma, the containers would come in full and they would leave empty because of the dollar. Now, of course, many more things are moving out of the port than they have in the past. Ports are great, including the Port of Everett, I might add, not the Port of Seattle and Tacoma, the Port of Everett in my district, is now seeing container ships once every 3 days, not as much as the larger ports, but a lot more than in the past. And the fact that you see at the Port of Seattle, more so the Port of Tacoma, a lot of Kias being offloaded indicates that our relationship with Korea is very important. And if we could just get the beef issue settled with Korea, although there was an announcement that we did have it settled. There seems to be a little hiccup, but once that hiccup is done, I think we're going to just need a few more glasses of water, drinking a few more glasses of water while holding our breath. We'll get those hiccups done, and then we'll be able to hear from a lot more members of Congress about their support for the Korea Free Trade Agreement. So imports are important as well, and I think when you look at imports, it's not just I talk about China, but we're even starting to see some of that basic work moving to other Asian countries, namely Vietnam. So that the relationships that we have with countries in Asia are becoming more and more entwined, and not less. And frankly, a lot of folks in D.C. want to make them less entwined, and that's not how we see it on the West Coast. certainly in the Northwest.
Yes. Please identify.
Good morning, Congressman Larsen. Thank you very much. This is Nike Chin from Voice of America. Thank you for the comprehensive review. I do have a question regarding FDA and budget. I remember Dr. Eschenbach from the FDA director told Congress that by this May, the first FDA presence will be set up in Beijing, maybe in the form of a TDY. I would like to know the status of that if whether or not a FDA person already start operating in Beijing, and also have the United States got the okay from the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs to have a permanent office in China, and then any reason make you believe that they might not be okay, and what's holding back? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. With regards to the TDY, yeah, Mark Kirk and I were told, today's what, Thursday? It's Thursday, right? So it must have been Tuesday. We were told, FDA told us Tuesday that, in fact, the TDY assignments will be happening before the establishment of permanent presence there. So that, yes, that will be happening as far as I know. FDA is still on board getting a temporary assignments there. Second, I wasn't going to call out my good friends at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but in fact, it is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that's holding this up. And they really, again, my argument is that it is in our best interest to have FDA personnel there for safety reasons. It's in China's best interest to have FDA personnel to help them build the capacity to meet standards so they can continue having important export relationships that help them provide jobs to Chinese people. So there is a win-win here, and I look forward to the MFA being giving a thumbs up to permanent FDA presence in China.
One last question.
Yes, my name is Satu Lemay from the EastWest Center in Washington. Congressman, thank you very much. I'm from Seattle also, so it's at least from the same state.
You can ask two questions.
Two questions, great. Well, I'll have to think of the second one. You mentioned APEC specifically, and as you know, Congressman, in 2011 we'll be hosting the APEC summit in the U.S., and I wondered if you had any specifics that you think we ought to be focusing on as we move towards hosting that summit.
Well, with regards to APEC, the first thing APEC needs is more support from the federal government. It is, I would say, woefully underfunded compared to the funding that we provide to more well-established institutions that focus on areas that aren't Asia. And if we define, as I think we ought to here in the U.S., define the Asia-Pacific region as a place where we are going to have a presence for a long time and lead and partner, that APEC is the obvious mechanism for us to utilize, and as a result, that we need to fund it more. We were able to get a little bit more money for it last year. The last couple of years, it's still not enough. The second thing I'd say about gearing up towards 2011, or even just be on the APEC agenda. I mean, they mostly have it all figured out, but there are some issues that just don't get a lot of attention that ought to get more, and one of them is, I would argue, is counter narcotics. For instance, when you talk to cops in China, somebody might be part of the public security bureau, but the local public security bureau, it's like talking to a cop in Seattle. or Everett. They just want to just want to catch the bad guy. And on drugs, talk to these guys about the drug